This is Grandmaster Daniel Naroditsky, and we are watching Vladimir Kramnik taking on Hikaru Nakamura at the 2010 FIDE World Blitz Championship. Kramnik starting with his usual knight f3, c4, and g3 English opening setup. Hikaru responding with kind of a Queen's Indian approach, fianchettoing his light-squared bishop and now getting his dark-squared bishop out, and now the position has flat-out transposed to a classical Queen's Indian with rook e1, a very topical move now for a couple of decades, kind of a waiting move. And Hikaru strikes at the center. Kramnik moves past with d5. This is all theory. Knight h4, opening up an attack on the d5 pawn, which he recaptures. A trade of knights here. Breakneck pace as Hikaru moves his bishop away, and this is still common theory. Kramnik with 3 minutes and 14 seconds, more than he started with, as he continues moving fast. Bishop f4, d6, and now we've transpositioned into kind of a Benoni setup here with that pawn on d6 and that superiority for black on the queen side, but white with the advantage in the center. And for Vladimir Kramnik, one plan, well, the immediate threat is to play knight d2 to c4, and so Hikaru could consider playing b5 to restrict the mobility of white's knight. Kramnik's secondary idea could be to move his light-squared bishop away from e4 and then start pushing his pawns in the center. e2, e4, eventually f2, f4 after the dark-squared bishop moves, but Hikaru unconcerned with knight c4 as he plays queen e7, and I think his idea is to meet knight c4 with rook f8 to d8, preparing to give up a rook for 2 pieces on d6. So Kramnik, he seems a little bit surprised at that move. Maybe he was expecting b5, and a little bit of hesitation there for Vladimir as he moves his bishop back from e4 to g2, and he tries to keep his options as open as possible. The knight remains on d2. It could also jump to e4, and if Hikaru is not careful, that move could be nasty, but Nakamura develops his knight to d7. And now will Kramnik play e2, e4 and revert to that second plan, or will he play knight c4? And he does neither. He plays a2, a4, and he stops Hikaru from ever being able to play b6, b5. Nakamura could reinforce that threat by playing a6, but then I think Kramnik will play knight c4, and Hikaru's knight from d7 will not be able to go to e5 because the b6 pawn will hang. That is the depth of the ideas that these players display even in a blitz game. So Hikaru with a very savvy waiting move, improving the position of his rook, and now Kramnik moves his knight up to c4, and it's met with knight d7, e5. And now a trade on e5 with bishop takes e5. Kramnik trying to preserve his strongest piece, that knight on c4, trying to carry white's offense on the queen side with queen c2 moving to b3. He was preparing the move a5, and Hikaru on alert, bishop b7 to a6, preparing to meet a5 with b5. And it doesn't seem to me that Kramnik is achieving all that much out of the opening and into the middle game here, with Hikaru's pieces being incredibly active, and now the move e3, and Hikaru pushing with c4, expanding on the queen side, and attacking white's queen. Where will Kramnik move the queen? He moves it to c3, offering a trade. Hikaru immediately responds with rook ac8. He says, I'm fine with a trade, but only on my terms. He doesn't want to freeze up the queen side, and now we have a standoff. Will we see an endgame here in the near future, with both sides contemplating the pros and cons of trading queens? Hikaru hesitated there. I thought he was about to take the queen, and now he does. So we have an endgame here. Now Kramnik still has that superiority in the center, and he displays that with his last move, f2, f4, preparing further advances in the center with e5. But Hikaru, he's got the queenside majority, and Kramnik has a bunch of weak pawns on that queenside, in particular the a4 pawn. So he's going to have to keep that pawn under his watchful eye and not get too distracted, not get too carried away with his center pawn play. So how will Kramnik manage all of his affairs here in the center and on the queen side? This is a complicated endgame. It's unclear who's better. Both sides down to 2 minutes. Kramnik could make a waiting move such as king f2. Instead, he brings his rook into the game, rook a to d1. The downside of this move is that he leaves the a pawn unsupervised. Hikaru could play rook c5 to a5. And if I have a finger on the pulse of Kramnik's idea, he wants to play e4, e5 anyway, and he wants to sacrifice the a4 pawn and get his pawns rolling in the center, and that is exactly what happens as the position heats up. Kramnik striking in the center with e5. He's got his rooks perfectly placed, and Hikaru says thank you for the pawn. He takes on a4, and if Kramnik rushes with e takes d6, he might end up losing that d6 pawn after rook d8, but he does take e takes d6. What is his follow-up idea? It might be rook e7, infiltrating to the 7th rank, and he does. He executes the move with confidence. And Hikaru moves his bishop back to c8, preventing d7. Now can Kramnik keep his d pawns alive? That is what the battle is revolving around, and he tries his best. He plays rook e7 to c7. He puts pressure on that bishop, so Hikaru cannot take on d6 right now. He will lose the bishop. He might have to move that bishop, but where is he going to move it? Will he move it to f5? Will he move it to g4? That is what he's thinking about, and he does move it to f5 after a little bit of hesitation. Kramnik gets his other rook to an open file, and there goes the pawn on d6, so Vladimir's still left with a passer. It's on d5, it's defended by the bishop. Now his other rook can come into the game with rook e8 check. He could win back the pawn on f7, but then he will get skewered with bishop g6. So there's a lot of tactics here, and Kramnik taking his time. Both sides now down to a minute and a half. This is a big moment. Vladimir Kramnik has to decide where to put his other rook. Will he put it on e5, on e7, or on e8? There are a lot of options. He's now down to a minute 20. He's got to make a move soon. He continues to ponder this critical moment, and he decides on a slow move, h2, h3. That is classic Kramnik. He never rushes. He tries to keep his options as flexible as possible, and he prepares kingside pawn expansion with g4. That will kick away Hikaru's bishop on f5, and that bishop on f5 is defending a lot of important squares. So Hikaru has to figure out whether he wants to play h5 in order to discourage Kramnik from playing g4, or will he find something more important to do? He does play h5, so he stops g4. And who does that favor? Kramnik plays g4 anyway, so he blasts open the kingside, sacrificing a pawn. What is his idea? What if Hikaru takes twice on g4? I think Kramnik might eventually want to put a bishop on e4. Well, I guess we're about to find out because Hikaru has taken twice, but will he take twice? He's taken once. Will he take twice? He does, and now he's down below a minute. What is Kramnik's follow-up idea? He wants the e4 square for his bishop, but will he put a bishop there immediately? No, he gives a check on e8 first, and now he takes on f7, and his rooks have acquired incredible activity, and he threatens bishop e4, and that is essentially checkmate. Bishop e4, king h6, and then rook e8 to h8 is a mate. Hikaru has to attend to that, and how will he do that? He brings his bishop back to h5, skewering the rooks and essentially forcing Kramnik's hand, forcing bishop e4 check, and then Hikaru will cover that check with his own bishop from g6. What a strong defensive idea by Hikaru, and Kramnik clearly overlooked that as he drops to below a minute. Let's not forget the black is still up a pawn, so if Hikaru can parry all of Kramnik's threats on the king side, his queenside pawn majority will undoubtedly make its presence felt, and Kramnik still has that weakness of the pawn on c3, which Hikaru could target with a well-timed rook a4 to a3, and Kramnik keeps glancing over at the clock. His clock is ticking down. The first head shake of the game as he realizes that his initiative has come to a crashing halt, but can he figure out a way to keep the wheels turning and to save this game as he trades bishops? Sees nothing better than to take on g6, and Hikaru deciding which piece to recapture with. He can take back with the rook and give a check, but instead he takes back with the king and attacks the rook on f7, and Kramnik continues to look at the clock, and d5 is hanging as well, and Kramnik's rooks, as active as they look, will they be enough in order to give him the draw? He plays rook e7, doubling on the 7th rank and attacking the pawn on g7. Hikaru takes on d5. There goes the other passer. And now Kramnik, he takes on g7. But can black's king escape all of the checks? And rook g5 check does not win a rook because of king f6. Hikaru, wow, he survives on a thread here, king f6, and now a trade of rooks is inevitable, and Hikaru has kept his extra pawn, and he should be able to convert his advantage here as he will finally divert his attention now to Kramnik's pawn on c3, and Vladimir starting to realize how dire the situation has become as he's got 10 seconds. He still has one passed pawn, but it's not going anywhere. It's restricted fully by black's king. And now b5 by Nakamura, and he finally plays rook a3, targeting that pawn on c3, and Kramnik cannot afford to give it up as he defends it with rook e3. Can Hikaru find the crushing blow here as he gets his other pawn rolling, and now rook e5 by Kramnik, but it's defended by Hikaru, and now here goes his pawn, and Kramnik desperately trying to get his king into the defense. Now, this is not over yet, because after a3 king c2, Kramnik will be able to stop Hikaru's a-pawn from e1. So has he succeeded in erecting some kind of a fortress? Has Hikaru rushed with pushing that a-pawn? Because now his other pawns have lost their mobility, and the move b4 is not as dangerous because it only leads to a pawn trade. But Hikaru continues to push his a-pawn. He's down to 20 seconds. He overlooked something. There's a2. Can he find the win? Rook back to e1 for Kramnik. He wants to go rook a1 and win the pawn on a2, so maybe Hikaru should get his king up, but he goes rook b1. Wow, forcing a transition into a pawn endgame, and has Hikaru calculated that his king is in time to recapture on f5? You can see him calculating and confirming, and now taking on b1 is Kramnik. And king f5 by Hikaru. He's going to take on f4. Oh, and I think he might have miscalculated. Or has he? King a3. Kramnik going after Hikaru's pawns. Hikaru going after Kramnik's pawns. And no, he has not miscalculated. He has calculated brilliantly. He's going to get up to d2 and win Kramnik's pawn on c3. And Vladimir Kramnik resigns. What a game by Hikaru. And if you enjoyed this game, make sure to click the link in the playlist for more videos. Thank you so much for watching.